We must admit that we were the first ones who didn't want to believe what we are about to show you today. We analysed the official crime data published by the governments and statistical agencies of Italy and France to discover which of these two countries is truly more dangerous. And to make the comparison fair, we considered only metropolitan France, excluding crimes committed in the overseas departments and territories. The result is both shocking and fascinating. We examined hundreds of data points to uncover the truth about general crime, violent crime, terrorism, organised crime, citizens' perception of safety, the most dangerous areas in these two nations, the effectiveness of law enforcement, and the profiles of criminals. And the outcome is more surprising and complex than one might think, and we will reveal it at the end of the video. Italy and France. Which country is the most dangerous? Welcome to Amazing Europe. Everyday safety is not defined by great threats, but by small fears. It's the kind of crime that targets our belongings, a field where Italy enjoys an almost legendary reputation for pickpocketing and bag snatching. A reputation that is indeed based on real evidence. Analyses of tourist experiences place Italian art cities at the top of the European ranking for this specific risk, with France coming in second. Yet this image, while accurate in crowded historic centres, changes when we consider not only tourists, but all citizens. When analysing official data, we find our first real twist. With an Italian rate of 259 thefts against the person, France records an astonishing 887. That's more than 3 times higher. The French data show that the risk of being personally robbed in everyday life is statistically much greater in France. This is not an exception. In fact, there is only one category among those we examined where Italy reports a slightly higher rate than France: the theft of an entire motor vehicle. But as soon as we shift our focus, the picture flips completely. When looking at thefts inside vehicles, France records a rate twice as high as Italy's. Even regarding burglaries, one of the most feared crimes, the French rate is higher than the Italian one. The same trend continues with property damage and acts of vandalism, where France again shows a significantly higher incidence. Even fraud and cybercrime, a modern and growing phenomenon everywhere, are statistically more common in France. When all these data are combined, an unmistakable and counterintuitive picture emerges. For property-related crimes, the criminal pressure experienced by citizens and their possessions is higher in France. But these are objects. What happens when the threat is no longer against what we have, but against who we are? What do the numbers show when crime turns violent? The comparison begins with the most extreme and irreversible figure. The rate of intentional homicides in France is twice as high as in Italy. This gap is already significant, but it widens dramatically when we consider attempted murders, where the French rate is nearly 3 times higher, and 4 times higher if we include the overseas departments and territories. But it is when we analyse non-lethal violence, the kind that wounds both body and soul, that the numbers become staggering. For physical assaults, such as injuries and beatings, France records a rate almost 5 times higher. And if you think this happens because Italians report crimes less frequently than the French, that's not true, because studies show that the rate of reported assaults is almost identical in the two countries. And here we reach the most disproportionate figure, the one that deserves serious reflection. In France, almost 17 times more sexual assaults are reported than in Italy. When we saw this number, we immediately asked ourselves, is it realistic, or is there something we haven't considered? We checked that the statistics in both countries measure the same thing, meaning that France and Italy define sexual violence in the same way. And yes, the definition is identical, so that could not explain such an enormous difference. Then we asked, perhaps Italian women report much less often than French women. And indeed, that's true. Some European studies from 2014 show that in France, 19% of sexual assaults are reported, while in Italy, only 11%. The difference exists, but it's not enough to explain why France reports so many more cases. More recent studies suggest that this gap in unreported cases has widened in recent years, but even that cannot justify the fact that France has 17 times more reported assaults than Italy. In short, it truly seems that sexual violence is far more widespread in France than in Italy, even if it's difficult to say exactly how much. Having clarified this crucial point, let's return to our comparison. Finally, robbery, the crime that combines violence and theft. Here too, the same pattern appears. The French rate is nearly double. The resulting picture is clear and consistent. For crimes against the person, France records markedly higher rates in every category. But there is another form of violence that does not follow the logic of common crime, but rather that of terror. How does the picture change when we analyse this threat? In this field, the gap between Italy and France becomes a chasm. From 2000 to today, France has been, unwillingly, the epicenter of jihadist terrorism in Europe. Devastating attacks such as the Bataclan massacre or the Nice attack have marked an entire generation, leaving behind more than 270 victims. A true low-intensity war fought on national soil. During the same period, the Italian landscape has been radically different. Although the country remains on high alert, it has not suffered large-scale jihadist attacks. The main threat has come from within, from anarcho-insurrectionist terrorism, with its demonstrative parcel bombs, and from the final echoes of left-wing political terrorism, involving targeted assassinations, extremely serious actions, yet with an incomparable toll. Only a few victims. It is important to clarify that we are referring only to attacks after the year 2000. Let's remember that from the late 1960s to the early 1980s, Italy was the stage of a long series of politically motivated terrorist attacks, both right-wing and left-wing. This tragic period was known as the Years of Lade. But now the situation has changed dramatically. The picture is therefore clear and unmistakable. On one side, indiscriminate mass killings. On the other, a contained, politically motivated internal threat. Two countries, two completely different stories of terror. Yet there is another force that challenges the state, not through the terror of bombs, but through a silent and pervasive power. To measure the level of organised crime within a nation, there is a specific index, the Global Organised Crime Index. The ranking is clear. In Europe, Italy ranks third for criminal influence, while France ranks ninth. This gap reveals the deepest difference between the two countries. Italy is fighting against historic mafia organisations, the powerful and global Calabrian 'Ndrangheta, the fragmented Neapolitan Camorra, the long-standing Sicilian Cosa Nostra, and the more recent Apulian Sacra Corona Unita. But this raises an important question. If the mafia is so powerful, why is Italy's homicide rate so low? The answer lies in a change of strategy. The era of massacres in the 1980s and 1990s has given way to a strategy of concealment. Modern mafia organisations avoid overt violence, which attracts state attention, and instead prefer silent infiltration into the economy. The goal is no longer to spread terror, but to conduct business. This logic is most evident in the practice of extortion. In Italy, the pizzo is the tool through which the mafias maintain control over their territories. Of course, it is not a normal reality across the whole country, but there are specific areas where organised crime is more likely to impose an illegal tax, the pizzo, in exchange for fake protection, which is in fact the price one pays to avoid retaliation and to be allowed to work. The French landscape, on the other hand, is described as dominated by predominantly foreign criminal networks: North African, Balkan, and Eastern European. These groups are more fragmented and specialised in specific illegal markets, such as drug trafficking, arms smuggling, and human trafficking. Outside Corsica, extortion is almost non-existent. We therefore have two opposing models. On one side, a systemic cancer that devours society from within. On the other, an ecosystem of transnational criminal enterprises. An abyssal difference that also shapes the very perception of danger. So far, we have analysed official data, but there is another truth, perhaps even more powerful: the truth of fear, the perceived crime. To measure it, we use Numbeo, a vast database that relies not on police reports, but on the direct responses of thousands of citizens. It does not measure crimes, but the anxiety they generate, and the results are revealing. The overall index of perceived crime in France is 55.59. In Italy, it is significantly lower, at 47.16. Of course, in many categories, the level of concern is similar, rated as moderate in both countries, from the fear of being pickpocketed to that of home burglaries. But the differences emerge in the details. In Italy, the fear of car theft is perceived as low, and this is despite the paradox that, as we saw earlier, more cars are actually stolen in Italy than in France. Moreover, Italians show little fear of being victims of armed robberies or physical attacks based on skin colour, ethnicity, or religious beliefs. In both countries, there is a widespread perception that crime has increased over the past 5 years. Yet here we find a crucial detail. While Italy displays several areas of low concern, France does not have a single category rated as low. The perception of risk ranges only between moderate and high. It is the only country in Europe with no subcategory showing a low level of fear, making it the European nation with the highest perception of crime, at least according to Numbeo. It seems that citizens' feelings almost perfectly reflect what the official data have already revealed. But what happens when we try to measure not the perception of specific crimes, but of one that is widespread and elusive at the same time? There is a more silent kind of crime, one that does not steal a wallet but the citizens' trust: corruption. To measure it, the leading organisation is Transparency International. Its 2024 Corruption Perception Index is merciless. Considering that the higher a country ranks, the less corruption is perceived there, France is placed 25th in the world, while Italy ranks 52nd. But why this difference? Because the two countries experience different forms of corruption. In France, the problem is seen as a corruption of the elites. It concerns the upper spheres of politics and finance, conflicts of interest, and the influence of powerful lobbies. The French recognise that it exists, but they also perceive it as a phenomenon that affects the daily life of the average citizen less directly. In Italy, on the other hand, corruption is perceived as a systemic and pervasive evil. It is the tool through which organised crime infiltrates public contracts, especially in sectors like healthcare. It can manifest itself at every level, from major bribery scandals to small local favouritism, fueling a deep mistrust in institutions. In summary, regarding the perception of corruption, France appears safer. However, these are two different ways in which the rule of law is betrayed, and we will now see where these phenomena are geographically concentrated. Crime is not distributed evenly. Every nation has its red zones, metropolitan areas where risk is concentrated. To understand where, we analyse data not from individual cities, but from their provinces or departments, to obtain a complete picture. In France, the geography of crime forms a map of specialisations. Paris is the capital of predatory crimes such as theft, pickpocketing, and robbery. Marseille and Nice, on the French Riviera, are the epicentres of drug trafficking and lethal violence, while Lyon and Toulouse stand out as hubs for organised theft and transit-related crimes. Areas such as Seine-Saint-Denis in Paris and the city of Lille complete the picture as centres of urban violence and narcotics logistics. In Italy, the picture is dual. The large provinces of the north and centre, such as Milan, Rome, and Turin, dominate the rankings for mass crimes like theft and robbery. The southern provinces, such as Naples and Palermo, although showing fewer widespread offences, suffer from generally more intense violent and organised crime. But it's in the direct comparison that the numbers turn brutal. To make it fair, we compared the rates of 3 key crimes in the 5 most populous metropolitan areas of each nation, using data from the French departments and Italian provinces. The difference between the largest metropolises of these two nations becomes a chasm when it comes to drug trafficking. Rates in French metropolitan areas are even twice as high as those in Italian cities. Paris's rate is far higher than those of Rome and Milan combined. Even the French city with the lowest rate, Lyon, still shows a value higher than most Italian cities. Here, the data reveal a problem that is structurally and quantitatively more severe in France. But it's with vandalism that the picture flips, revealing an unexpected truth. As we've seen at the national level, the vandalism rate is clearly higher in France. But if we look only at the largest metropolitan areas, the picture changes. While French cities like Marseille record very high rates, the northern Italian provinces, particularly Turin and Milan, show even higher levels of property damage, surpassing even Paris. This phenomenon in Italy is highly concentrated. By contrast, the large southern provinces, such as Naples and Palermo, report surprisingly low rates for this crime, helping to lower the Italian national average. But in the face of these threats, how does the state respond? Italy and France, although they have similar police forces, have developed different philosophies and areas of expertise, shaped by their own historical battles. Italy has forged world-class excellence in the fight against organised crime. Units such as the DEA and the ROS of the Carabinieri are the result of decades of war against the mafias, using extremely sophisticated investigative methods. France, on the other hand, has had to specialise its forces in maintaining public order in high-tension urban contexts and in combating terrorism. But how effective are they in solving everyday crimes? This is where the harsh reality of the numbers becomes clear. Regarding the most serious crime, homicide, both countries demonstrate a high investigative capacity. France solves about 81% of cases, and Italy follows closely with 75%. Justice, when life itself is at stake, works. However, the situation collapses dramatically when we move to mass crimes, those that affect thousands of citizens. For home burglaries, the clearance rate is very low in both countries, between 3% and 7%. It is even worse for vehicle thefts. The truth, bitter but necessary to acknowledge, is that the overwhelming majority of these crimes remain unpunished. This is a huge challenge for two security systems that, despite their excellence, struggle to provide concrete responses to widespread crime. But who actually commits crimes in these countries? Before revealing this, if you found this video informative, we kindly ask you to support our project with a like, to subscribe to our channel, and to click the notification bell so you don't miss our new videos. We also remind you about our new channel, America vs. Europe, where we compare all European countries, the United States and Canada across various factors. Now, let's look at the profiles of these criminals as revealed by official law enforcement reports. Starting with France. Violent predatory crimes, such as robberies, are committed mainly by very young offenders, often minors, with a high proportion of foreign citizens, including unaccompanied minors in major cities. Home burglaries and tourist pickpocketing are the work of itinerant criminal networks from Eastern Europe. Homicides are committed mainly by adult men between 30 and 49 years old. When it comes to drug trafficking, both importation and street dealing are mostly carried out by young French citizens, often of foreign descent, raised in degraded suburban areas. This is a form of crime born from internal social distress, intertwined with transnational networks. In Italy, the criminal landscape is quite different. Here, a duality exists between common crime and mafia power. Home burglaries and tourist pickpocketing, as in France, are carried out by organised foreign gangs from Eastern Europe. Street robberies in the northern metropolitan areas also show a strong presence of young foreigners. But the picture changes radically when we look at drug trafficking. Wholesale drug importation is almost exclusively monopolised by Italian mafias, first and foremost the 'ndrangheta, run by adult men affiliated with clans. Street-level dealing, however, is delegated to young Italians in mafia-controlled areas and to groups of foreigners, especially Africans, in the cities of central and northern Italy. Homicides, once dominated by the mafias, now occur mainly in family settings and are committed by Italian men. Mafia-related murders, though now rare, are still highly targeted and carried out by affiliated killers. We started with a simple question: Italy or France? Which is the more dangerous country? But now we understand that the question itself is framed in the wrong way. The real question is, what kind of danger are we willing to consider? If by dangerous we mean the statistical risk for an ordinary citizen of becoming a victim of crime in everyday life, then the official data draw an unmistakable picture. France shows higher rates in almost every category, from thefts to drug dealing, from robberies to assaults, all the way to the most extreme figure, that of homicides. The perception of its own citizens, who rank it as the European nation with the highest level of widespread fear, only confirms this reality. But if the question changes, if by dangerous we mean the deepest and most systemic threat to the state, the economy, and the social fabric, then the record belongs to Italy. No other country in the European Union fights against a criminal cancer as entrenched, historic, and powerful as the mafias. It is a threat that cannot be measured merely in police reports, but in the silent infiltration of public contracts, the corruption of politics, and the control of entire economic sectors. In conclusion, France appears as a country suffering from a higher and more acute criminal fever, which directly affects the daily lives of its citizens. Italy, instead, resembles a country that has been battling for centuries against a chronic and deeply infiltrating disease. And what do you think? What is your experience? And what is the situation in your country? Tell us in the comments. But there are nations in Europe that are doing even worse than France and Italy. To find out which ones, we invite you to watch this video, where we reveal the 10 most dangerous European countries according to real data. That's all for this video. See you next time.